Welcome to the 1000 Hours Outside podcast. I am thrilled today to have Katy Bowman on the podcast talking about movement and how much movement matters. And the other day I was sort of kind of looking Katy up. It's before I got information on her, and I hopped on Amazon to look up this book, and there was like another book and then another book and then another. It's all these books. But Katy, this is such a huge accomplishment to write one book, and then it says you have 9 books, and I thought I counted 10, but I must have counted wrong. Is this the newest one?
That is the latest, yes.
This is the latest. So we're going to be talking today about Grow Wild, the Whole Child, Whole Family Nature Guide Rich to Moving More by Katy Bowman. It's a fantastic book. She's also written Move Your DNA, Movement Matters, Alignment Matters, Whole Body Barefoot. There's so many here.
I know.
Congrats on writing all these books. That's super impactful. Have you been writing for a long time?
I started with writing short articles, a blog form, and I got really good at writing short form, which is completely different than long form. So when I went to my first, and I think there's probably 10 books, but one of them was re-released. It was Every Woman's Guide to Foot Pain Relief.
Okay,
and
that is what it was.
Simple steps. So we just count that as one because it was minimal editing to make it.
Well, I count it as 2.
Well, and you know what? Maybe I should count it as 2 also.
You have written 10 books, Katy.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
I've written 10 books. So then when I transitioned to writing books, it was challenging because writing short form is different than writing long form. And I think once I did the work to shift my brain into writing long form, I was like, well, I'll just pop these books off then like blog posts. And then I was nursing 2 kids, and I feel like I was just really pouring out of a lot of things at that time. So a great number of them are written, in that 4-year period. And then I've taken a break for a few years, and then Grow Wild is the one that just sort of bubbled up of late.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome. I'm excited to read the other ones. They all looked really intriguing. So I wanted to read here on your bio. It says you're best-selling author, speaker, and leader in the movement. Bio. Okay. I know. I was sent the word.
That was
You're going to
good.
have to say it for me. So
it's biomechanist. So not biochemist, biomechanist. Yeah.
Yep. Katy Bowman is changing the way we move and think about our need for movement. Her 9, but really 10 books, including groundbreaking Move Your DNA and Movement Matters, have been translated into more than a dozen languages worldwide. She's been on the Today Show, CBC Radio One, Seattle Times, Good Housekeeping. I mean, this is all just so phenomenal that you are just really impacting people to move. And the Grow Wild book is beautiful. It's beautiful. This is a beautiful book. It feels good. And it's just filled with all these gorgeous color photos of real people doing real movements. So I just love that. 200 full color photos from all sorts of families who sent them in. So I love it. I just want to say I love it. So for people who are listening, if you're looking for something new to read, something to inspire you to move, you definitely want to check out Grow Wild. So I thought maybe we just talk about a couple of the topics that were in there, and some of the things that really piqued my interest. One of the things was about stacking your life for movement. So in the book you talked about, and I think so many parents relate to this, that there are so many pieces to the puzzle, right? There's so many pieces to the puzzle when you have children. And so can you explain kind of what stacking is and how does that help families kind of put all those pieces together?
Sure. So the idea of stacking comes from the concept of permaculture. It's the idea that multiple needs are being met, multiple functions are being met at the same time. So the way I would say many parents try to, the way that many parents attempt to meet multiple needs at the same time is through multitasking. This idea that, we're going to go out and we're going to maybe take a walk, but I'm going to take a couple work phone calls. while I'm doing it. And it just gets it gets to the point where, you're trying to grocery shop, but you've got your kids there, you're going to try to get food for dinner, but you're also taking a call, and it just gets very chaotic. And the thing with multitasking that they've been able to figure out is even though you're maybe seeing yourself accomplish multiple things at once, you're not really able to focus on multiple tasks at once. Your brain's really shifting back and forth between them. You're just really trying to get a lot done in one particular space. So you're not able to give many things your attention when you do the multitasking approach. Stacking is a little bit different. So stacking is also trying to meet multiple needs in one period of time. But instead of bringing multiple tasks to, let's say, an hour, you're looking for one single task that you can give your attention to, because that's how we work. We can focus on one thing at once that meets multiple needs. So it's a little bit different. It's sort of a slight difference. So an example would be, you could take a walk. We have individual needs as grownups for movement. Our kids have their individual needs for movement. We have our needs to work on our relationships together. We have other needs like getting food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like we have to be able to eat. We also have to be outside. We have this nature requirement. We also have to know about the natural world. And so one of the tasks that I picked when my kids were really young was to go out on, I'll call them foraging walks. It was this idea that, I need to get a walk. We need to get out of the house. I need to walk. You need to walk. Let's go get some nature time. But I would make it really specific because kids really like to eat and they really love to go gather, especially little kids. Little kids are really keen to pick apples and pick berries, and there was like a tree a mile away. And so we would just walk to this tree, and then along the way there were neighbors who were out, and so we were sort of getting this community dose at the same time. And we would have a backpack and we would just gather what we could along the way, and some of it was food. We had neighbors pass us things over the fence that they were growing. It would be picking a bouquet of flowers for decorating the home. And then we would also be getting this other, wild food that we were foraging or just, gleaning. And so what we were doing is usually spending like 3 hours to take this, mile walk, but it met so many multiple needs. And there's just something about outside, as you know, that really has grand capacity to hold lots of energies and pressure. And so that would be one idea. Now, I know that that's not practical for everyone all the time, but that's just the idea of the concept. As you look for that single task, go pick apples off an apple tree. And then what you see is many needs being met at the same time. So it's a very efficient way to get us out of that loop where every day we're sort of going, man, I didn't get some needs met. You know what I mean? Like I fell short on multiple needs, and then that causes quite a bit of stress. And so I'm just trying to show a slightly different way, and also just pointing out that we probably have more needs than we recognize. We don't understand necessarily all the needs that we have.
I like that you gave the example. I call it agritainment.
Right.
Some people call it agro-tourism, but I like agritainment. I would say that is our favorite thing to do is hike. And really, I would say it's my favorite thing to do. I think my kids really like to do the things if there's friends, but they're only drawn to it in certain capacities. I would say that right underneath there is this agritainment, because for me as a mom, I'm like, okay, well, we can go to the blueberry farm. And it seems to be a fair amount of you pick type places and places that are, kind of pretty accessible, and it's cheap. You're talking $1.25 for a pound of blueberries or something like that. And so, as a mom, I'm hitting like the snack requirement, and they're just really engaged there. So and really, talk about facilitating different types of movements. It's like each of these different things, you're having to reach up to pick the apple. You're having to climb the tree, and the trees are all, apple trees are perfect for climbing. I think they're made for children, but then the blueberries are squatting, or the wet raspberries, the strawberries are squatting down. So it's neat that even in nature, the different types of things that you forage would facilitate different types of movements,
right.
While sort of hitting all these needs. I think in the book, it talked about soup night, which I was drawn to that. I thought that was a really
favorite.
Cute idea. And just like you said, facilitating relationships. I was talking to this author yesterday, Dr. Chris Winter. He came out with this book called The Rested Child. And he was talking about how, all these things are what releases serotonin, the relationship piece, and the being together, and the community, and the warm food, and the outside. So I love this idea of stacking, and as a way to sort of meet needs, right? That's sort of what you're saying there, is just to meet the needs. And I love that. So you have a lot of information in there about that. I think that's great for parents. I like how you opened the book with talk about trees and how trees experience movement. And that's something I had never thought about before. Can you talk about that, and sort of how movement affects trees and how that relates to us?
Well, so I'm a biomechanist. So biomechanics is the study of how physical forces affect living systems. That can be humans, but it's really any living system, plants, trees included. So when I write books, when you read all 40 books that I've written or will have written someday, you'll just notice that my style of writing, my style of teaching through writing, is to use non-human examples, because I think when we can detach the humanness from the lesson, there's less ego involved, and we can hear it a little bit
interesting
better. And so with Grow Wild, I chose to use the plant analogy through it's an analogy, but it's also that we have the same set of laws. Living things follow the same set of laws in the universe. So I start with children are like trees, and then I go on to talk about the shape that trees have. And so I'm not sure we have a lot of cedar trees here in the Pacific Northwest. Everyone's got their own set of trees, and trees have genetics that make them identifiable as the type of tree that they are. So you can recognize oak trees and cedar trees and alder trees and redwood trees because you recognize the colors of their bark, or the shape of their bark, the way that they branch.
Mm-hmm.
That's held in their genes. But trees also have a shape, like you're not going to see carbon copies of trees. So trees branch, the geometry that they branch, how many branches, and then I guess I should say how many limbs and then branches and then twigs that you have off each piece is the shape that they create in response to what they're experiencing. And one of those, so we also we know that trees are competing for light, and they're competing for other inputs from the soil, and so they're growing in response to where it's shaded or where it's not. They're taking all that in. But a big element, trees are very tall and big, and they have to be able to withstand the physical environment. And so they branch, and that goes for above ground and in their roots below ground, based on what's happening to them physically. So winds come through. If you have a wind in a particular direction, you're going to see branching that reinforces their ability to have good leverage in that regular wind. And I did another podcast interview, and the woman interviewing me had said, yes, when they were in a hurricane, because there was a strange direction of wind, it took all the trees out, because the trees had not grown to resist that direction of wind. They had grown into, like we're not set up to withstand every single thing. We're built to withstand the environment that we're exposed to regularly. If you have snow, like you have snow loads, and that it breaks different branches off, but then what is left is able to sort of like it's selecting for the shape that's going to do really well in that particular environment. So that's a process called thigmomorphogenesis. It's this idea that
I love it.
plants, I know it's a fancy word.
I love it.
I mean, it's a fancy word, but to me, it's a real clear word because it's just made up of really simple, fig is touch, morph is grow, genesis is also grow, morph is, I guess, to change shape. So it's like a shorthand of a big word. But trees that are grown in greenhouses, which a lot of trees are, and it's like, great, we need to sell trees. We're going to make tons of trees and we're going to grow them in these greenhouses because we can control the environment. But what they're finding is that trees that grow, plants really that grow inside of greenhouses don't transplant well to the outside. They can't do well because they do not have the shape for anything else but being in the greenhouse. And then it's sort of like, okay, well then great, leave them in the greenhouse, but that shape isn't actually good for just living either. It turns out that they really need, plants and humans alike need outside, which I think obviously your listeners and followers are going to understand that. But the piece I'm like pointing out is the load that you're experiencing outside has a lot to do with it. That part of nature is not just, the natural sunlight and the microbiome. It's really the pushes and pulls on your body when you're out there, and we need them. Our anatomy needs them. Our physiology needs them, and it needs them early on because you're setting your adult body in childhood. And this is the first generation that has just been a mostly indoor plant. Right. And so really even though we're unprecedentedly sedentary and inside, never more so has it been with this generation coming up, and never more so has it been in the last year and a half for everyone. So we're like in this really strange pocket of time where our physical bodies won't see things until later on. So in the book, I talked about bone and trees are really easy to sort of superimpose on each other. Yeah. So osteoporosis, for example, is really a pediatric disease that manifests in later years. We don't think about that because you're not concerned with it, but what you're doing, what it's revealing is what, in most cases, it's revealing what your childhood was like in terms of load, and also dietary nutrition, like minerals. But even if you have an abundant amount of minerals, without the movement, those minerals can't be inputted in. So it's both of those things. So just to be like, childhood is important for these reasons. It's not something where we can sort of like, well, we'll make it up later on the other end. That's not how the nature of it works.
And, you see it within the movement. It's like, well, children, my kids from very young ages, they would climb up on the fallen log and they're going to jump off and they're going to jump off. And then as they get older, they're going to go on something higher and they're going to jump off and they're going to jump off. And with each of those impacts, they're strengthening their bone structures. Well, you don't really see adults doing those movements, right? It's a movement that kids do and they're intrinsically drawn to do, and increasingly, higher challenging levels. So I like what you're saying there. It's like, this is the window to capitalize. And I really do think that using those natural examples, it makes you excited instead of defensive, right? You're like, I could be like a tree and exposing myself and making my roots stronger and growing better for my environment. I really like that approach, a really interesting example right off the bat. So it really drew me in to the book. And then the format of the book, I love it. You're talking about sort of movement in different capacities and sort of a little bit different of challenges to movement. Like you start out with culture, what does culture talk about for movement? What does your home culture look like? And then you go into these different things. I like the chapter about celebrations.
My favorite.
I think that was my favorite too. And just anything can be a celebration, and how can you add movement to those celebrations? But one of the things that I loved was some of the pictures in the home. So we talked about the home environment, having low tables. I saw pictures of it looked like maybe a grandma and a little boy hanging on these bars in the home. So can you talk about what are some things, because we're really big about getting outside, obviously. But then a lot of families ask, especially in the colder months, and, we're going to be heading into the fall here. What are some ways that you can facilitate movement for children and adults right within the home setting?
So, I mean, so I organize a book by containers. It's like this, like, what
Mm-hmm.
are we spending our time in? We're in our culture, we're in our clothes, we're in an activity, we're in home, we're in our homes. And also, like, what is nature exactly? Movement is an element of nature. And so just like a lot of times we'll bring natural materials, pine cones,
Right.
rocks into a classroom. So at least you can have your hands on nature when you are in otherwise indoor spaces. Movement is another one of those elements that you can bring into your home and
Oh, I
should.
love that.
It's just the same
I
thing. Like, that's all
love
it is.
that.
It's a
And we
pine
do
cone.
that. I mean, that is one of the things that we suggest for people when they say, well, what about this? Or, I'm in this
Sure.
certain situation. And so we talk about bringing nature in and bringing in those natural elements. But I love that piece of it by saying, well, the ways that you move is also a part of nature. And
Yeah.
so you can facilitate that indoors as well.
And the way that you move in nature. So what are some of the ways, if we were to list, like, what are my kids getting when they're outside? Okay, they are getting to jump off things again and again and again. They're getting to hang from things. They're getting to climb things. They're practicing their balance. So they're getting to sit on the rug, or they're getting to sit on the ground versus in a
They
chair.
squat. I think they do a lot of
They're getting to
squatting.
squat, right? So those are elements of nature. So how do we bring them into the home? Why is the home discouraging them? It's like, okay, well, you're not, so just what are the rules of the home? You're not allowed to jump. You're not allowed to hang. Okay, because we don't have anything that you can hang on safely. Okay, then fix that.
Yeah.
Bring in something. So that's why you'll see. So we had, brachiation, which is hanging from your arms.
I wrote that word down. I like that word.
Yeah. So
like a monkey,
brachiation is very important movement for humans. It's part of, if you think of, bone is easiest to understand. If you think of, jumping again and again and again as something that's going to build up the hips and the thigh bones, those bones that are later going to be at greater risk for, fracture because of low bone density. Our shoulder formation is really quite the same. It's a little different. Instead of being a compression, it's a tension. But the shoulder is being formed by being able to hang from and swing through. So getting those on, like, we come with the grasp reflex. We are coming, seeking out. Like, there's a reason why kids want to climb and scale, and why their hands are so strong compared to the rest of their body. Like, we're built for this sort of movement. And it's the period of time that, again, you're shaping your shoulder girdle, you're breathing, your thoracic container, your joints and connective tissue. And so, it was important for us that we had a place for them to be able to do that to the amount that their bodies really wanted, even though that amount isn't really required in today's society. It's like, I can, we feel good if we can get our kids outside for an hour or 2 hours a day. But imagine, a genetic code, a DNA that's really built to be outside 100% of the time.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, I don't really know how to do that so much every single day in this particular society, but I know how to bring in a chin-up bar or a hanging bar. And so we just did things like that. We got rid of all of our seated furniture. Now that's sort of the extreme, but as a biomechanist, I actually started it when I was pregnant. I was like, my back hurts, my hips hurt. I got to get out of these chairs. And I started sitting on the floor and found myself, just by doing that, putting in all those stretches or exercises, that I needed to do for my pregnant body anyway. And so we just really, really didn't introduce our kids to things like that for quite a bit of time, so that they could squat. We have low tables where they're able to move around without having to be in a chair to sort of be at adult height. So we thought about the physical environment as something that we could modify so that not just them, but all of us got the movement that we needed. So that's why our house is so, my house has been featured in a lot of different media just for that, because I think it's bizarre. It's like, they have monkey bars in their house. They don't have any chairs. And we have art, and we have rugs, and we have cushions, and we have all sorts of other things. And I also just point out, like, we're sort of an outlier with our furniture in this particular culture. Like, we are the penguins. Furniture is the penguin in this bird scenario. You can go to many places in the world, and the amount of furniture, the way we use furniture, is just not the norm for humans. It's just
interesting.
It's outlying, as far as behavior goes.
Yeah. We tried we're in Michigan, so the winters get pretty cold. And so we
Mhm.
tried, I mean, you can buy climbing furniture for kids. And,
Sure.
you know, our kids love that. The pickler triangle, and then the ramp, you know, you got the
Mhm.
ramp and they're jumping off and they're trying these different things. So I love that. I love that chapter about just about home. And then I think you also talked about like in terms of home, you know, that kids want to be where the adults want to be.
Right.
And that's a thing. You know, we had read one time that there was a study that came out that no matter how large your home is, you know, that primarily people stay within 400 square feet. So you can have this
Mhm.
massive home, a small home, but you know, kids want to be together. You know, you think you buy this big home and they're going to play in the basement or they're going to go play in this bonus room, but no, they just want to be with you. So
They're in the kitchen with you.
right. So one of the things you talked about was, well, what can you take outside? So like for me, for example, we've got a garden. I'm not a good gardener. It's new. But if I know that if I'm out in the garden, whether the kids are engaging in the garden or not, they're going to be outside with me, you know, and finding their own thing to do. So you had even talked about, can you take the laundry outside? Think about that fact that the kids kind of want to be where you are. And, you know, how can you make where you are this place of movement? So really, really cool ideas. I also thought too, with the shoulders, we talk about writing posture, you know, and so that when kids get to school age, they got to be able to really use, we just think of our fingers, right? But they've got to be able to use all of this to have good writing posture. So the hanging, I would imagine, you know, really helps with all that as well.
Yeah, we tend to go, you know, we focus a lot on fine motor, as you know, OTs will often give screenings to maybe like there's like a 5-year-old test, like a 5 or, you know, kindergarten readiness test for kids, and the scores are going down. And you know, it's really related to like how well are they able to control their whole body.
Yeah.
You know, can you put a balance beam in your house, you know, or a line of tape, you know, there's just ways of exposing kids to some physical complexity,
Yeah.
so that they're not entering school age without any sort of movement skill. You know, we've definitely focused on reading skill of late, and you know, like read books to kids, you know, get them into their life. I would say the same thing goes for physical literacy, where our physical literacy is declining. And so that also needs to be, I mean, it's yet another task for parents. So I think that's why I focus so much on saying, no, this is the need. This is not just their need. This is your need. And when you're collectively reaching it together, everyone feels better for reaching it that way. Like it doesn't need to be a point of stress. This, you know, newly identified yet another thing we have to do or work on. It's really just going back a little bit to how human, like where we came from, humanity wise. And you know, it's usually free, you know, to do. Like you don't even have to buy things to put into your house. You can often just move things out of the way and change the rules. Yes, please cartwheel in the living room. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be a big burden.
Well, and that's how I feel. So with 1,000 hours outside, that's sort of been our thing as well. I mean, I think a parent looks at, okay, 1,000 hours outside in a year, that seems insurmountable. Where am I supposed to find the time for that? But it's sort of like what you're talking about. This is the baseline. And if this helps everything else, you know, if it helps everything else work better and it helps their brains work better, and so then their academics is better, it's sort of like this foundation, you know, that makes everything else work in tandem. And so I think we're missing that foundation piece. And so then everything else is harder.
Well, and if you see it, I mean, it seems like a lot. And I think it's a lot if you view it as, I have to do 1,000 hours outside. That's like packing for 1,000 hours and figuring out 1,000 tasks and cool things to do outside. But soup night, for example, that's just dinner with friends in a park. You are going to have dinner anyway. Soup night makes it easier. You're taking turns making a pot of soup. You just bring it, like there's no cleanup. Everyone ended up being outside for 3 hours and everyone ate without complaining. Like once you get into it and really look at this, you're going to see it makes everything easier. You're going to do less work. It's not more. You're going to do less. Changing the habit is the work. Changing the task is the work. But other than that, it's going to be easier.
Right. And the more you're out of the home, the less messy the home is and that type of thing. We did a soup lunch. I've only done it once, but we, in Michigan, the colors change so beautifully in the fall. And so we did this fall colors hike and brought along a little camping stove because you can dip the leaves into wax and it preserves the color. And So anyways, we had this, whole cart like loaded down with stuff, but because we had the camping stove, we brought soup, and it was really memorable. We got all these kids and families, and we're dipping the wax, and everybody's having warm soup. And like you said, it's just hitting all sorts of needs. It's helping their social skills, and they're learning things about, color and change. And so, that idea of stacking is just such a fabulous one. Okay, so one of the other containers you talk about, the home container, which I think is really an interesting chapter. It's got so much for parents to think about. One of them is the clothing container. I like how you say, if they're not play clothes, what are they? So that's great. So you said our culture tends to be hand dominant, which was an interesting little phrase there to use. So talk about clothing that facilitates movement.
Well, so we always said we put on our clothes, but we're really getting into an outfit. Kids are getting inside yet another thing. And we don't necessarily think that the thing that they're inside of could have any impact on how their body is moving. And so the book includes ways to start evaluating clothing for the movements it facilitates or prevents. So, if we just did one example, like think about a pair of pants that you have, and then you would repeat this exercise for your kids. Can you bend over and touch your toes in it? Like, is it so tight around the waistline that you can't bend? If you have a jacket or a shirt, does it let your arms go overhead? Or are you sort of limited when you're wearing something? Stretch is a big thing, but then there's also sometimes clothes are too baggy. Like if you watch kids go up into trees, and they've got something billowy or flowy, it can get in their face, it can get caught on twigs, and then they have to remove some of their safety holds in order to deal with clothing that is not really suited for that particular activity. And then, I've did a lot of work with our local nature school, and our kids went to our local nature school, and kids would show up in winter boots, but winter boots are extremely stiff, and they often pass over the ankle. So that means that they don't have the ability to dorsiflex and plantar flex. And I just kept hearing again and again, it's like, my kids are just so clumsy, like they don't really have good balance. And here they are trying to cross logs, maybe for the first time, but they're wearing shoes in which they can't really perceive the sensory information coming up from what they are on. And they can't make micro adjustments. A hand dominant means, like think about a piano player or writing, all these little motions that we can control in our hands. Well, we have that same capacity for our feet, but our feet tend to go boom into gloves and into something stiff and then remain that way forever. And so we lose that ability it affects eventually our gait, our knees, our hips, our balance, our pelvis, our spine, like a big hunk of motor control is thwarted. So of course we have to wear shoes in many environments. We don't always have to wear them, but they're required sort of for life in most cases. So to look at how do I start to evaluate footwear so that it allows for more toe and more ankle movement? Like there are shoes that do that, and there are pants that flex better at the knees and the hips. And so we're just used to, I think, using style.
Yes.
And also with gear, there's things like weather, we are, especially if you're going to nature school or outside, you're looking at how well does this gear protect me from the weather. But if it really hinders movement, like I'm thinking winter gear right now. One of the best ways to create heat is by moving around a lot. So if you trade off movement for your winter gear, especially for little kids, it's going to make being outside a miserable experience. So, you have to become fluid.
That's interesting. We've had so many experiences where, so my midwife taught me about wool.
Right.
And we use merino wool, because it's soft, it's not scratchy. And then I've learned over the years all these nerdy things about wool, but basically that it generates heat, somehow the chemical components of what wool is comprised of, and mixing with your sweat, it creates heat as much as, I think I read somewhere that 2 pounds of wool can generate as much heat as an electric blanket. And then it holds the heat because the wool hairs are curled, and it creates all these pockets. And then And then it also pulls the moisture from you, and moisture is what makes you feel cold, right? So when you're wet, you're cold. So kids that are wearing cotton, they're cold, you know, if that's the thing that's against their skin, they're cold. But what was interesting to me when we switched to wool was that my kids, even in pretty cold temperatures, would be taking off their layers because they're hot. So I like what you say there about how, you know, people say, well, what about winter? Well, probably one of the most important things is that you're moving and that you're not wet, you know, that's what you're trying to sort of facilitate there. And then that's going to help kids be more comfortable. But like you said, if you've got the big snowsuit, you know, you've got these big hunky boots, they're two, you know, or they can't move at all. And so then they're cold and they're miserable. And so you had a practical tip in there I'd never seen before about wool socks with water shoes. You know, so just to say for parents, like there was really good ideas in here about the clothing container and things to think about. I really love that chapter. You had a cooking container, which we kind of talked about with agritainment. But you said this word snacktivities.
Activities.
Yeah, I love that, right? It's a fun way, you know.
It's just finding the movement in your food, you know, like it's like humans, again, eating is the most important thing to our survival. And we've transitioned from a culture that was all about handing down, I'll say, food knowledge. And like we now call it plant identification and wilderness school, but I'm like, that was just eating. That was just straight up eating. It's not specialized. It's the most sort of general information for a human. It's only now becomes sort of specialized. So to really restore to restore the ways that like what information is more essential that we pass down to our kids. And it's like, this is the food on the planet that you have. And here's how to work with it and how to process it. And then it's also, you can go to the gardening. Here's how plants grow and what they need. And then you can also go to just cooking. Here's how you take raw ingredients and put them together into something else. Because I think that we've definitely lost food knowledge as a culture, which makes us particularly vulnerable. You know, we are in a pretty vulnerable spot when we don't really hand down how to eat. We've replaced dietary nutrition. Make sure you have enough protein, make sure you have fat. We've replaced that from actually how do you source, find, and prepare food? Where does it come from? Who's doing that work? You know what I mean? Like it's the biggest system that we depend on, yet most of us don't really know that much about it, and certainly not enough to produce enough for ourselves. So that's a great source for movement, is my point. My point is you're going to need to eat. This is essential knowledge. It's literacy. It's literacy in food, in I don't even want to use the word nutrition because it's more about calories. It's simply getting enough to eat. So it's a great spot, like as you said, agritainment, but it also just it just puts you more into touch with this age-old, never going away system that we need to be aware of.
I saw in your book, you had a picture of someone harvesting potatoes. And so we're new to gardening. This is our second year. And I just feel like I've been missing out on my whole life. You know, it's so fascinating. It provides so much joy and it's just intertextures, all sorts of things. But potatoes are just beyond easy. Like you have old potatoes that you're not going to eat. You literally just drop them in the ground and they grow. And I didn't know they have beautiful flowers. It's this beautiful process. So last summer we went out with our daughter was 4 and we're going to go, you know, try and harvest these potatoes. Somebody told us when to look. And I mean, we were just beyond enthralled. You know, it's like actually my husband and I, we didn't do a ton. So my husband and I were having to stop ourselves from like digging to let the 4-year-old do it. Because it's so exciting. What are you going to find in there? And so it was interesting just to see. I loved the picture in the book about that. It's like this hide and seek game, you know, for kids and adults, you know, something that's sort of innately in you that you just like to look and what's going to be there. And then, you're squatting down and all of those different types of movements. And then I don't know, in your mind, you think it tastes better. I'm not sure if it does or not, but it seems to. So
it's just magical.
It's a snacktivity.
It's a snacktivity. Well, I still, you know, there used to be those games that I would play in Highlights magazine where you're trying to find the hidden pictures.
Yes. Yeah.
I still can't see artichokes growing on artichoke plant any other way. Every time I see one, I'm like, oh, like I found one, I spotted one, you know, because they're just sort of blending in. So so many of our games and things that we play now, I think, are trying to replace the wonder that came from discovering essentials outside.
Yeah.
We've replaced it with play, with things that don't have as rich of a play. They don't have a payoff beyond just the play.
Right.
When you could be getting the play and the discovery and be meeting many more needs at the same time. So we're not just sitting inside sort of with a game book and meanwhile stressing because all we do are play games and we don't know how to do the essentials anymore. So I think we are at the point now where like, yes, we need to get back in. We need to reconnect to this. The time is now. It's never going to get easier. So this is it.
There's this book called Glow Kids, and it's about screens. And in that book, the author talks about how our brains are wired for novelty, for new things. And so, you know, obviously the tech companies are taking that hardwired need that we have and capitalizing on that. You know, so all of these things are novel, the way that video games work and an email and all those sort of things. But, you know, then when you go out in the garden, you know, or you go to the farm or these different places, you know, you're like, oh, look at this apple I found. Look at the shape of this one. I found a huge one. You know, is there a potato under there? And like you said, you're some of the things really blend in, right? So you're having to really search through, you know, is there where's the pumpkin? And you're looking under the leaves. And so that, to me, that reminds me of the stacking, right? It's like you're hitting that need for novelty and you're learning about food, and it's all these things are happening at once. So I like that comment, that concept of snacktivities. Let's see what I'd written down here. Another one of the containers, one of the things you said in here was just that nobody is teaching kids about the places movement belongs outside of exercise.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really powerful statement. Can you kind of talk to that?
So a lot of my grown-up work, which is a funny thing to say, my work for grown-ups has a lot to do with reframing, like the difference between exercise, physical activity, and movement. And so humans, the concept of exercise has recently emerged, you know, because there used to be so much more movement in life. And so as we've slowly as this culture has slowly gotten rid of it, then we're like, we've gotten rid of it. We've gotten rid of the movement that occurs in day-to-day life for getting the things that we need, but we haven't physically gotten rid of our need for it. We've just gotten rid of how it happens naturally, how we were able to get it in the process of the day. So then we have to create something. It's like, okay, well, I need to take exercise vitamins then, because my movement diet is so sparse. I'm going to need to supplement these essential pieces. So we're handing that down to our kids, you know, where movement. So it's in activities, the activity container, I'm trying to really break down the difference between something structured movement and unstructured movement. And so unstructured movement, which is often called play, and play might have some other elements, but it's this idea that you're physically dynamic, but there's no rules about like what is actually happening during that period of time. And then often if you'll watch kids and really grown-ups alike too, that the movement ends up changing over time. It's sort of like child-led movement where like they get deep into something else and then something else emerges and it balances out with something else, and they've got sticks and they're running around, and you know, now they're all laying on their backs and like balancing their sticks on their legs. Like it's just unscripted. So we've replaced that with, you know, as people have been outside less, perceive outside as dangerous, their neighborhoods dangerous, being without other grownups, where kids are just facilitating that with other children. You know, like we used to just play, you know, you play pickup games of we'll say soccer or whatever ball game, but then eventually it just becomes tag and you make your own rules and there's no grownups around at all, to something required, you know, there's 12 kids that can be together and you are going to play this game and here are the rules and I'm here with the whistle. Okay. And now you're done, even though you were just sort of getting into it, and now you're going to be done with this movement. We've really transitioned to that latter, very structured activity. And I think that what we've noticed in this last year is what happened when everyone was really structure activity dependent. You know, when they were not practiced playing in their homes, playing in their yards, playing in that other area. And so that's an element of what I mean by we're not teaching our kids more than sort of like exercise. Exercise is when you go in for a structured bout of movement that has a predetermined time, a predetermined mode,
Right.
and really a reason that you're doing it. So, you know, if you're like, you need to be outside moving around, okay, because like that's what it takes to get you healthy. That's going to be more exercise centric than just general well-being. You're going to go play this sport for 1 hour. That's more exercise. So kids are not really aware of what I would call the category of movement called labor, which is being human takes a lot of work. That's always been the trade. You're here and you have to do a lot of physical work to be here. You have to build a shelter, maintain a shelter. That's the work that it takes to do your home and your life. You have to be able to find and source food, grow food, tend food, prepare food. You have to be able to source water. You have to be able to physically carry things around. Like that's what it's taken. But as we've gotten rid of all of that, as every single, you know, as everything has gotten, as we've gone for the movement-free versions of everything in our life, exercise, sports, classes really seems to be the only place that movement happens. So if you're a child born into this and you look around, you're like, you have no idea that movement occurs outside of this category. Now, adults all over are struggling because we have gotten rid of the movement everywhere. So I'm talking about kids, but thinking about it on the adult level that I already deal with, where the problem is emerging on a public health level. We have so many diseases of inactivity that are billions of dollars that everyone's trying to solve. How do we get adults who move more? We don't know. I'm like, you have to start with kids who move more. Like at this point, we have to look at what are we teaching children of this culture so that they can have a leg up, so to speak, when it comes to being able to maintain the activity in adulthood, because it needs to be more than exercise. Exercise, again, is such a narrow task. You could never get enough of it, you know, in a way that your body really needs. And so it's just about bringing in some of those joyful labor practices that involve movement and exploration and fun.
It makes me think of, you know, as a child, we had in our neighborhood just a kind of a rundown baseball field. There was like a little park and a baseball field. And, you know, so, you know, you think about how much more you move when 4 kids show up at the baseball field and want to do a pickup game, or there's 6 kids, you know, as opposed to there's 12 on this team and 12 on that team. Well, how often do you get to bat? And, you know, you're only it's not a sports word, but like you're only in this part of the outfield, right? But when there was 4 kids, you're constantly running because you've got the whole outfield, or, you know, you're constantly batting because, and then, you know, then there's all the social, you know, kids are having to cooperate and negotiate and all those sort of things intrinsically because they want to keep playing and they want everyone to be happy. And so, you know, with the stacking comes in there too, right? That, you know, I think if we look at sports and we're trying to get kids into college, and, you know, that maybe seems like one of the only goals, right? Or is that they become really proficient. But, you know, when we do it in this more simplistic way, there's all these other things that are happening, right? They're moving more and they're happy and they're negotiating and they're working on all these different things. So I like that, you know, it's getting movement so that kids know that movement is needed all the time, you know, in a bunch of different capacities. So I saw this little section about different games that caught my eye, different nature games, because I didn't know Hoop and Spear, Capture the Flag, which I've played, Jays and Junko, Hungry Bear, Drumstock. There's just a lot in this book. I think, you know, it's just really cool. So once again, I'm showing it. It's going to show up backwards, but there's a lot in here, a lot to get out of this book, a lot of specific information. And I came out with an activity book earlier this year, and I thought it would really just be read by parents. You know, I'm like, well, this is just going to be parents, and they're going to come up with these ideas and use them with their kids. But the feedback I got is that the kids love the book because they really like to look at pictures of people doing real things. And so I just really love that about your book. And what you say in here is that then kids will see things and this will spark some ideas. Like, I'm going to go grab a shovel and then that's going to be good work. And, or I'm going to bend down. I love it. Like, oh, I can hold a chicken. Oh, it's so cute. There's the potato one. And I loved the one of, there's two people hanging in the home and they're hanging on the bars. And so I think, it's phenomenal. There's 200 photos in here. So this is a great book for parents, but it is also a great book for kids to peruse through. And I think they become inspired. That's a way that they learn that movement happens all the time or can happen in all sorts of different capacities. So, Katy, if people are looking for more information about you, about your book, about your 10 books, where are some good places for them to go to find you?
Nutritious Movement. So that's nutritiousmovement.com. And then on social media, I do Instagram is probably my most regular place where and it's just me. And I just try to share things from my life. Like this is me doing the things that I talk about in these books, but another example, like what does this example look like? What's the application of a principle? So that's just at Nutritious Movement for everything.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And your books are all on Amazon, I saw. I typed in your name and they all popped up. They all look super interesting. Let's end with this. Can you tell us a favorite outdoor childhood memory of yours?
Oh, okay. My favorite outdoor childhood memory is when I'm 45 and when I was in 4th grade, so I would have been 9, Halley's Comet came around and my 4th grade teacher organized a 4 a.m. field trip. I'm going to cry even talking about it. And my mom volunteered to drive a group up there. And so we went up and we were on Mount Madonna, which is the mountain behind my house. And they had the telescope set up and the 4th graders got to look, the star. It was maybe the first time I had been out in the stars that someone had set up a telescope. And we watched it and in a mountainous area, right? So there was like the beautiful trees and it was just about the novelty of being up so early, so special. The fact that my mom, who was a full-time single mom, who like never could really do anything like that, but she could go at 4. She could never volunteer. So when you're thinking about things like who gets to come and chaperone and be for the kids, it's like, just remember the single working parent out there who never can say yes, but she could, because she could do it before work. And so it was that. And then the teacher threw a breakfast afterwards. So we drove back to class and now it's 6 a.m. And I remember there was like donuts and like another special thing. And I don't know, I probably just fell asleep. I don't remember anything else about the rest of that day, but I remember that experience. And so just don't forget the celestial nature events and don't forget about dark time. The early morning and the after hours is such
it's magic
time that you can get those hours. Like for me also, not a single parent, but a very like an 80 to 100 hour working parent a lot of the times. When my kids were younger, that 5 a.m. walk or that 7 to 8 p.m. walk is how we get hours in together because we explore the nighttime and the early morning time. Take breakfast and dinner to go. It's totally worth it. So much more than sitting down around a family table. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Katy. Really appreciate you having you on. Excited for everyone to hear all these things that you had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the interview.
Thank you.